Riyadh, November 2017. The marble lobby of the Ritz-Carlton turned into something no billionaire expected: a gilded prison. Dozens of the kingdom's most powerful men were stripped of their phones, their freedom, and their illusions of untouchable wealth. Among them, a man once celebrated as the Warren Buffett of the Middle East. Sex, 0.5. Prince Alwaleed Bin Talal, a billionaire whose empire stretched from Citigroup to Twitter, found himself behind locked doors, uncertain if he'd see daylight again. His face, usually beaming with confidence, was now etched with disbelief. Sex, 0.5. For decades, Alwaleed had seemed unstoppable. Royalty, fortune, global prestige. And yet, in a single night, he was reduced to a detainee. Was this about corruption? Or was it a power play to remind everyone, even a billionaire prince, that no one was bigger than the kingdom itself? One sembles, 0.5. The story of how Alwaleed reached that gilded cage is one of ambition, risk, defiance, and reinvention. And the question that remains today: is he still the master of his destiny, or just another figure in someone else's grand design? Sex, 0.5. But to understand how the prince ended up in the Ritz, we must rewind to a boy born into two dynasties, already carrying the weight of expectation. Alwaleed was born in March 1955, not just into privilege but into a web of power. On his father's side, he was the grandson of King Abdulaziz, the founder of Saudi Arabia. On his mother's, the grandson of Riyadh al-Sol, the first prime minister of Lebanon. He was destined for greatness, but not guaranteed a straight path. His childhood was complicated. His parents divorced when he was young, and he spent his early years in Lebanon with his mother. The boy who would one day move billions of dollars around the globe was, at first, known for sneaking away from school, for pranks, for restlessness. He wasn't the quiet, studious heir people expected, but that restlessness became hunger. In the late 1970s, Alwaleed studied in California, where the swagger of Wall Street and the dream of American capitalism left their mark. He studied business administration and returned with a single obsession: not to live as a passive royal on stipends, but to carve his own empire. His father gave him seed money to start. Twice, Alwaleed lost it all. That might have been the end of the story, but instead his father gave him one last gift. Not cash, but the deed to a house. Alwaleed mortgaged it and turned that leverage into capital. This was his baptism into business. From that single deal he began building, first in construction, then in real estate, then in banking. He wasn't shy, he wasn't quiet. He was young, aggressive, and unafraid to cold call American banks and negotiate as if he were already a titan. And slowly, something shocking happened. He became one. But the real turning point, the moment the world began to notice, was still ahead. A financial storm would give Alwaleed his chance to prove himself on the global stage, and the way he seized it would earn him comparisons to Warren Buffett himself. The 1980s in Saudi Arabia were a golden time. Oil prices high, the kingdom rich, wealth pouring in like rivers. Most princes leaned back, content with government stipends and palatial comfort. But not Alwaleed. He looked west, not inward. He wanted legitimacy, not as a royal, but as a businessman. And in 1980, he founded Kingdom Establishment for Commerce and Trade, which later became the giant known as Kingdom Holding Company. This was his stage, his weapon, his shield. The Citibank gamble. His defining play came in 1991. Citibank, one of America's most prestigious banks, was on its knees. Losses had spiraled, Wall Street was turning away, and investors were dumping shares. The future of the institution looked bleak. But Alwaleed saw an opportunity where others saw disaster. He quietly poured $590 million into Citibank. For perspective, this wasn't just money. It was the lifeblood of the bank, at a time when even American investors had lost faith. Overnight, the young Saudi prince became the single largest individual shareholder in Citigroup. It was outrageous, risky, even insane to some. But it worked. When Citigroup recovered, his stake ballooned in value. Suddenly, Western media scrambled to understand this mysterious prince from Riyadh, who played Wall Street like a maestro. He wasn't just another rich royal. He was a kingmaker in global finance. And with that, the nickname was born, the Warren Buffett of the Middle East. But if Buffett built his empire slowly, carefully, with steady caution, Alwaleed preferred boldness. And boldness made headlines. And not just headlines, enemies. Because now, he was no longer just a Saudi prince. He was a Saudi prince with influence in America's financial heart. What else would he dare to buy? The hotels, the palaces, the icons. The 1990s and 2000s became a shopping spree, but not for trinkets. Alwaleed wanted icons. He bought the George V Hotel in Paris, pouring more than $200 million into renovations and turning it into one of the world's most glamorous luxury addresses. He scooped up a stake in the Plaza Hotel in New York, the legendary symbol of Manhattan high society. Then came the Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts. Partnering with Bill Gates, Alwaleed became a controlling shareholder in the chain, adding to his growing portfolio of luxury properties. It wasn't about hotels. It was about presence, symbolism, branding. When you stayed at one of those hotels, you weren't just a guest. You were indirectly under the gaze of Alwaleed. But the hotel empire was only one side of the coin. He also built massive stakes in media and entertainment. Rotana, his Arab media company, became one of the largest producers of music, TV, and film in the Middle East. He had his hand in Time Warner, in News Corp, even Disney. And yet what shocked people most wasn't where he invested. It was when. Being greedy when others are fearful. In 2008, as the financial crisis shredded the global economy, investors panicked. Banks collapsed, housing markets imploded, and Wall Street was in ruins. But Alwaleed did something only a handful dared. He doubled down. He increased his stake in Citigroup even as its share price crashed to record lows. He stood on the trading floor smiling, telling cameras that Citigroup was still the future. It was classic Buffett logic. Buy when everyone else is selling. But unlike Buffett, who had the comfort of a US empire backing him, Alwaleed was playing across continents, with oil prices volatile and political eyes watching. For some, it was inspiring. For others, reckless. But the gamble paid off once again, sealing his reputation as an investor with nerves of steel. Still, cracks began to appear, because behind the image of the billionaire prince was something else, a hunger for recognition. The image of the billionaire Prince Alwaleed wasn't shy. He flaunted his wealth in ways Warren Buffett never did. He owned a private Boeing 747 refitted with luxury suites, complete with a throne-like chair. Later, he ordered an Airbus A380, the world's largest passenger jet, customized into a flying palace, with a concert hall, a stable for horses, even a garage for his Rolls-Royce. His palaces in Riyadh and Jeddah featured hundreds of rooms, pools, banquet halls, even a private zoo. His yacht, the Kingdom 5KR, once belonged to Donald Trump and appeared in the James Bond film Never Say Never Again. Western tabloids adored it, but the extravagance fueled criticism at home. Some saw him as a reformer who projected modernity, others as a royal flaunting excess in a conservative society. And then there was the thornier issue, his connections. Controversies in politics. Alwaleed had always played a delicate game, balancing his Western investments with loyalty to the Saudi monarchy. But that balancing act became tricky after 9/11. In October 2001, he offered New York City $10 million for relief efforts, but attached a statement suggesting the U.S. re-examine its policies in the Middle East. Then Mayor Rudy Giuliani rejected the check outright, sparking outrage and painting Alwaleed as controversial in American eyes. In Saudi Arabia, his Rotana media empire promoted artists and content often seen as too liberal or Western for conservative clerics. He positioned himself as a modernizer, but not without enemies. Still, his influence grew. By the 2010s, he was ranked among the richest men on earth, with wealth peaking at more than $30 billion. His empire stretched across sectors: finance, real estate, technology, media. He was untouchable. Or so it seemed. Because while Alwaleed was enjoying his status as the Buffett of Arabia, a new player was rising in the kingdom. A player with ambitions that would soon eclipse his own. #Meta, pause. Huge. 0 Ps equals 0.5. And that player was Mohammed bin Salman. What happens when an unstoppable prince meets an immovable crown? That collision was about to redefine Alwaleed's entire world. November 4, 2017, Riyadh. The kingdom's most opulent hotel, the Ritz became the world's most exclusive prison. Gold chandeliers glittered above polished marble floors. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, the gates closed on an empire. #Meta, pause, sex, 0.5. Among those detained was Prince Alwaleed bin Talal, billionaire, investor, global icon. He had spent decades building bridges between East and West, buying iconic hotels, media companies, even stakes in Twitter. And yet here he was, confined, alone, uncertain. #Meta, pause, sex, 0.5. The official story, an anti-corruption crackdown. But for Alwaleed, the world was suddenly a chessboard, and every move felt dangerous. He had always maneuvered in high-stakes environments, but nothing prepared him for this. #Meta, pause, sex, 1.0. A palace coup? The mastermind behind the purge was Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, then rising rapidly in the royal hierarchy. MBS sought to consolidate power, reshape the kingdom under Vision 2030, and eliminate anyone who might rival his authority. Alwaleed was both an ally and threat. Wealthy, influential, globally connected. He could challenge decisions, influence opinion, or even, in theory, broker alliances with foreign powers. For MBS, letting him walk free meant leaving a kingmaker unchained. #Meta, pause, setted, 0.5. It wasn't just detention, it was psychological warfare. Prince Alwaleed, used to luxury jets and palace meetings, now faced the monotony and anxiety of captivity. Months stretched into weeks. Trust dissolved. Every negotiation carried a shadow of betrayal. Negotiation under pressure. Inside the Ritz, the detainees lived in luxury surroundings that belied their captivity. But the luxury was deceptive. Guards patrolled constantly. Phones, computers, personal freedom, all revoked. No one could reach the outside world without approval. Alwaleed quickly realized that survival meant strategy. He was no longer simply a wealthy investor. He had to negotiate not only for freedom, but for his empire, his reputation, and even his life's work. Reports suggest that the negotiations involved billions of dollars, transfers of assets, commitments to Saudi government funds, and concessions that were as much political as financial. Some sources say Alwaleed initially resisted, then recognized the futility of stubborn defiance. Every meeting, every phone call he did receive was a calculated dance. A single misstep could cost him not just money, but legacy. The psychological toll. Months in confinement took their toll. A man accustomed to commanding rooms, driving deals with billion-dollar stakes, suddenly became invisible. The usual chessboard of finance was replaced with an entirely new board. Palace intrigue, shifting loyalties, veiled threats. There were moments of fear, even despair. Rumors swirled. Some detainees would never leave. Some would be forced into exile. And the world outside watched in fascination, not knowing the full story. That Alwaleed adapted. He drew on decades of experience in negotiation, patience, and risk assessment. Every concession was measured, every public statement calculated. Behind closed doors, he maintained composure, projecting a confidence the outside world would later interpret as control. Release and strategic reinvention. Finally, after months of negotiation, Alwaleed was released. The terms were never fully public, but it is clear that he surrendered portions of his holdings while retaining control over much of Kingdom Holding Company. The release marked a transformation. Alwaleed returned to public life not as the unchallenged king of Saudi wealth, but as a seasoned survivor, a man who had stared into the abyss and recalibrated. The world saw a billionaire humbled but undeterred. Investors noted his strategic patience. Media reported his reintegration. Peers watched quietly, calculating what the new Alwaleed meant for global finance. Hashtag at Meta, pause, Sex 1.0, lessons in power and perception. The Ritz incident revealed vulnerabilities that had been invisible before. Wealth alone does not equal power. Connections alone do not guarantee safety. Alwaleed's fall was a reminder that influence is fragile, even when measured in billions. Hashtag Meta, pause, solicited 0.5. Yet the story also showcased resilience. Unlike many who might retreat into obscurity or bitterness, Alwaleed used the experience to refine his approach. He recalibrated his public persona, his business strategy, and his alliances. Hashtag Meta, pause, Sex 0.5. What followed next would not just be a return, but a reinvention, one that would challenge assumptions about money, power, and legacy. And here is where the story opens a loop. After surviving the palace purge, could a man once confined by power become a symbol of strategic rebirth? Could the Warren Buffett of Arabia navigate a kingdom reshaped by a younger, bolder crown prince and emerge stronger than ever? The next chapter, the Reinvention, would answer that. When Prince Alwaleed Bin Talal stepped out of the Ritz-Carlton, he was no longer the same man. He had been humbled, but not broken. He had seen the fragility of wealth, the volatility of power, and the ruthlessness that could exist even among family. Hashtag Meta. Yet his vision remained intact. He had always been a builder, a strategist, a dreamer. Now he had a new mission: to reinvent himself, his empire, and his image. He returned to Kingdom Holding Company, but his approach had shifted. The unchecked audacity of his early years gave way to strategic precision. He divested from some ventures, doubled down on others, and used his experience to hedge not just financial risk, but political risk. Strategic investments in a new era. In the wake of his release, Alwaleed reasserted his presence in the global market. Technology, which had fascinated him for decades, became a major focus. He reinforced stakes in Twitter, X, Lyft, and other emerging platforms. Investments that signaled both foresight and adaptability. But he also pivoted into entertainment and media, expanding Rotana's influence, backing Arabic cinema and music that resonated globally, and forging partnerships that blended culture with commerce. Even aviation captured his imagination. His famous A380 jet became not just a symbol of luxury, but a floating office and creative space for new ventures. Every move was calculated to signal that Alwaleed had returned, but smarter, sharper, and more aware than before. Philanthropy, wealth as influence. But perhaps the most striking transformation was in philanthropy. Alwaleed had always given, but now his giving became strategic, global, and visible. Through Alwaleed Philanthropies, he donated billions to education, disaster relief, and cultural understanding. Over 190 countries benefited from initiatives spanning healthcare, humanitarian aid, and interfaith dialogue. Meta, pause, Sex 0.5. In 2005, for example, he gave $20 million to Georgetown University, funding the Prince Alwaleed Bin Talal Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. This wasn't charity for publicity, it was soft power, influence, dialogue, and legacy. Similarly, after natural disasters, he stepped in with emergency aid packages, often quietly, ensuring impact without seeking headlines. But the media couldn't ignore his scale. Billions moved with precision, echoing the same strategic acumen that made him a billionaire. Meta, pause, huge, ACA, Sex 2.0. Navigating a kingdom in transition. Al-Waleed's return coincided with Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, the ambitious plan to diversify the economy and modernize society. The Crown Prince had consolidated power, but Al-Waleed's expertise, networks, and global reputation made him an indispensable advisor and player. He learned to operate differently, less ostentation, more diplomacy. The audacious prince who once flaunted luxury in jets and palaces became the quiet strategist, forging alliances, advising reform, and continuing to expand influence without repeating the mistakes of the past. Even in setbacks, like his personal fortune dropping to $15 billion, he remained active. His resilience demonstrated that financial strength is fleeting, but strategic acumen endures. Lesson from Reinvention. It is a study in human psychology, power, and adaptation. He survived being stripped of freedom and influence. He recalibrated his empire in a volatile political environment. He balanced tradition and modernity, showing that even entrenched power structures can evolve. In short, he became a model of strategic reinvention under extreme pressure. And yet, there's a tension in his story that remains unresolved. Despite his return, some questions linger. Can a prince, even one as visionary as Al-Waleed, navigate a rapidly changing kingdom without limits to his influence? #Meta, pause, sex, 0.5. Does wealth alone safeguard legacy, or must it be paired with perception, diplomacy, and timing? And in a world where technology, politics, and culture collide, what does the Warren Buffett of the Middle East truly aspire to next? These questions set the stage for not only his ongoing story, but the next chapter of global influence in the Gulf and beyond. #Meta, pause, plus, a global figure, a symbol of resilience. Today, Al-Waleed remains active in business, media, and philanthropy. His fortune, estimated at $17.8 billion in 2025, reflects not just wealth, but reputation earned, risk mastered, and networks cultivated. More than that, he represents the art of reinvention. A prince who was humbled by history, tested by power, and tempered by crisis, and yet emerged with vision intact and influence renewed. And this brings us to the final note, a reflection on legacy, risk, and the intersection of wealth and strategy. Prince Alwaleed bin Talal's journey is a study in contrasts: opulence and humility, audacity and patience, fortune and fragility. He was born into power but earned influence through risk. He lost freedom but mastered resilience. He flaunted wealth yet became a philanthropist, shaping minds and societies. His story is a testament to one enduring truth. True power is not measured by money alone, but by the vision, courage, and adaptability to survive when the world shifts beneath your feet. From the first bold investments in American banks to the dizzying heights of global luxury holdings, to months of confinement in the gilded prison of the Ritz-Carlton, Al-Waleed's life shows that even the most privileged are never immune to forces beyond their control. And yet, it also shows how strategy, foresight, and patience can turn adversity into opportunity. He has returned to the world stage, more measured, more calculating, and perhaps more aware of the delicate dance between wealth, influence, and survival. He is not merely the Warren Buffett of the Middle East. He is a symbol of reinvention, a lesson in resilience, and a reminder that fortunes may rise and fall, but vision endures. But as we reflect on his story, questions remain. How much of Al-Waleed's comeback is about wealth, and how much is about navigating the politics of power in a rapidly modernizing kingdom? Can one man truly influence a global economy while balancing the delicate forces of tradition, reform, and family rivalries? And when a prince can wield billions yet still be humbled by circumstance, what does that tell us about the limits of power in our interconnected world? Perhaps the next chapter isn't just about Al-Waleed, but about the new generation of Middle Eastern billionaires, the rising tech empires in the Gulf, and the interplay between wealth, diplomacy, and influence on the global stage. #Meta, pause, Sex, 0.5. As we close this chapter of his story, one truth resonates. History rewards those who adapt, and the world remembers those who dare to dream even after the fall. And so we ask, in a world where fortunes can vanish overnight and empires can rise from risk, who will be the next Alwaleed? Who will redefine influence in the 21st century? #Meta, pause, sex, 0.5. The answer may not be in Riyadh alone, but it begins there.